So anyways, well, it's so great to see so many of you. So welcome and thank you for coming. My name is Abey Fonn and I'm the founder of Impex Records. And I'd first like to thank Quintessent Audio for inviting us to be here today. I was here last year with Quintessent with our guest of honor, Nicholas Getz, Stan Getz's son. And we were sharing about the new release of Getz Gilberto One Step. And today I also have another special guest with me. I'm excited to demonstrate the next Impex One Step release, which is Sing and Dance with Frank Sinatra. I've had a wonderful privilege of working with my good friend Chuck Granata. He is a historian, a producer, an author, and he is all things Sinatra expert. Chuck and I started collaborating on this album almost 4 years ago. It's been quite a journey like Getz Gilberto, and we're very proud that it will be out in June of this year. So let me introduce you my guest of honor, Chuck Granata.
Thank you, Abey.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Such a privilege to work with you and Impex.
This album we're talking about, still thinking Getz Gilberto, Sing and Dance with Frank Sinatra, came at a pivotal moment in Sinatra's history and sound recording. In 1950, Sinatra was starting to fall out of favor with his music fan, and Columbia was actually seriously thinking about dropping him. Since he was mostly known for his romantic ballads, producer Mitch Miller decided he wanted to try to modernize Sinatra's sound and kind of give it a new, fresh facelift. This album, Sing and Dance with Frank Sinatra, has a much more of a snappy, jazzy tune, which was new back in 1950. At the same time, magnetic tape was starting to come into the industry, and we were shifting from the noisy 78 shellac to a more quieter, higher fidelity 33. And because of that, this album was conceived. Its original conceived was a 10-inch, right? It was an original 10-inch LP. Also, the Impex release of Sing and Dance with Frank, we were the first label to use the original analog tape in 70 years. And Chuck will be able to share some of that detail with you. So you want to take it away?
Sure, thank you, Abey. So this really was a special project for many reasons. And I like to give a little bit of context when talking about an album, because you listen to the record, you hear the music. I think it's really important to understand what was going on, not only in the artist's life, but in the record industry and in the country and pop culture at the time that it was made. And this actually came about at a very difficult time in Frank Sinatra's career. From 1949 to 1953, he really suffered a really bad moment, personally and professionally. He got divorced from his wife, his record label Columbia dropped him, his film agent and company dropped him. He really was falling out of favor. And it was in 1950, with his record sales at an all-time low, that Mitch Miller said, hey, why don't we do an album of jazz standards, because you sing up-tempo songs so well, and you don't really have an album of tempo or jazz arrangements out. And it was a really great idea for a couple of reasons. The first, that the 10-inch LP had been invented 2 years before by Columbia Records. So they now had the ability to present a long program of 8 songs on a vinyl platter instead of doing it on 78 shellac. So you had the factor of longer program, quieter surface, and also the advent of magnetic tape, which came into the studio basically the year that this record was recorded. And the magnetic tape aspect is really something that we can't overemphasize. You know, the fact is, magnetic tape gave the engineers the opportunity to really lay down some very high fidelity dynamic range, which you'll hear in a few minutes. So this album came about out of necessity and an attempt to really kind of revive Sinatra's career. The stage for the next part of his life, which was him going to Capitol Records in Hollywood and transitioning to working with Nelson Riddle and Billy May and Gordon Jenkins, and then the story just unfolds and we know where Sinatra ended up. But you know, there are many things that we admire in Frank Sinatra's artistry. His incredible phrasing is probably the most important. The fact that he sang like a jazz singer even before that was a thing per se. You know, he really learned how to phrase and back phrase from Billie Holiday and Louis Armstrong and Tommy Dorsey. And we start to hear him doing that on this record. So I thought it would be important. Should we play a track?
You want to start off playing a track?
Yeah, why don't we play a song called Lover, the Rodgers and Hart standard. These arrangements were written by George Saravo. Saravo was a popular arranger who had a small jazz combo. He wrote a very specific style, but he really did provide some very snappy arrangements for Frank to sing from, as you'll hear on this track.
So the track we're playing is side one, track one. It's called Lover. This is the Impex one-step, 45 RPM, pressed at RTI, and the vinyl formulation we use for all our one-step is the VR 900.
Hope you enjoy this.
Lover, when I'm near you and I hear you speak my name, softly in my ear you breathe a flame. Lover, I surrender to my heart.
Well, so did you enjoy that? Mono.
It's mono.
1950 mono. When I first worked with this set of recordings in 1993 for a CD box set at Sony Music, which owns Columbia Records, we worked from the safety copies of the sessions. Now, in 1950, when Columbia Records began to record on magnetic tape, they still didn't trust the medium yet. So the engineers for most of those sessions in the last half of 1950 and a little bit into 51 also ran backup 16-inch transcription discs, which was the standard up until magnetic tape for recording sessions. So we worked for many years from the discs. When I decided that we wanted to do Sing and Dance, I knew that we really should go back to the original tape for the 10-inch LP. And I located it and brought it in, and when we played it, I was astounded because there was no degradation of the quality of the tape itself. And even though it's mono, I heard a depth and a sound stage that's kind of unusual for that time. So, you know, it really had a lot of vivid, lifelike sound to it, very colorful, as you heard. So we searched for that tape, which we found, and then I also found some of the orchestral backings for this record. Now, some people don't know, when Frank Sinatra did this album at Columbia, he was having trouble with his voice. The month before, he had suffered a vocal hemorrhage on stage at the Copa in New York, so he really was not singing well. He had to sit back and not vocalize for a month or two. He was still hoarse when they came to do these sessions. So Mitch Miller said, look, we can overdub. This was not something that was common at that point. He said, let's get the band on tape, and then you can come back later and overdub your vocals. So in looking for the original tape, I also found some additional tapes which had the orchestra only. And then I found the composites with some outtakes and alternate takes from when Frank did come in a few months later and did the vocals. And it's really cool because we were able to include some of those bonus tracks on here. So, you know, that's another interesting aspect of this album from a technical standpoint, is the fact that it's not only a true LP on vinyl from 1950, but it's recorded on magnetic tape, it's overdubbed, and it really sounds high fidelity, which is wonderful. So this album really was a milestone in Frank Sinatra's career. The packaging, I'll let Abey talk about, because we're really proud of the way Robert Sliger, our designer, was able to turn this into a beautiful package.
Do you want to play one more track?
Yeah, why don't we play another track?
Also, you want to share with them, the bonus materials also show how Frank was really a good producer and how the direction that he...
For sure. So, you know, one of the things, there are many things that set Frank Sinatra apart from his contemporaries and his colleagues. Obviously the phrasing, his impeccable selection of songs. He really looked for songs that had expressiveness and where he was able to emote a certain feeling and evoke a certain mood. The other thing, which is really unusual, is that in almost every aspect of his work, he functioned as his own producer. And when we say that he functioned as a producer, he chose every song, he chose the order of the songs on his albums, he chose the arranger that he wanted to work with, who would best suit the mood or the concept of that record. And then, as we'll hear in a few minutes, when he went into the studio, he had very definite ideas about what he wanted to hear and how he wanted it to sound when someone played the final record. And fortunately, I was able, in my days of collecting, I was able to procure a set of open mic session lacquers from a Sinatra session in 1949, where he is literally directing the engineers where to place the microphones and where the musicians should sit. And I have never heard anything like this from another artist. From producers, yes. From technicians, yes. But to hear an artist in a recording session in 1949 kind of directing how he wants people to play and how he wants it to sound is really extraordinary. So we'll play a little snippet of that in a few minutes. But before that, I'd like to play something. I think this is my favorite song on this package, recording on this package, simply because of the sound. In 1951, Frank went into the studio, radio recorders in Hollywood, with his old boss, Harry James, and they recorded 3 songs. And the sound that they accomplished, again, very early tape technology, but the sound that they accomplished and what we're going to hear is really amazing, especially when you consider how powerful Harry James's trumpet sound was. I call this trumpet solo dazzling and just it's fiery. It's amazing. It really tested the microphone and the recording technology of that time. But you'll hear it's crystal clear. And again, we were using a tape copy of this session for many years because we didn't know where the original tape was. We found these 3 songs on a reel with a Doris Day session and a country session. So I was able to bring us back to the original session recording for the Harry James session. So this is Farewell, Farewell to Love, 1951, with Harry James on trumpet.
And it's mastered by Chris Bellman.
Yes, Chris Bellman at Bernie Grumman Studios in Hollywood.
I guess nothing to show you. That was his show.
Baby Holy Love, she had me all the time.
Touching the horns and
I feel so bad, I'm lost, that's the cost of love.
Well, there you have it. So when you hear that trumpet solo, you can imagine how much sound pressure and the energy of moving that air into the microphone was pushing the technology. We experienced it because I think we went through nine lacquers.
9 lacquers.
To try and get that onto the disc without distortion. It sounded great on the tape, but it was such high energy that in that solo there, it just kept distorting, and we heard. So Chris Bellman really worked a lot of magic.
Chris Bellman and Bob Donnelly.
And Bob Donnelly,
yeah.
our producer in QC, expert really worked together to kind of tame that down so it really sounds nice. But again, this is early tape technology. To me, in every way, this is high fidelity. This is what high fidelity was. And even though it's mono, you don't lose any of the sense of being in that room, at least to my ears. So that's something that I was happy we were able to find was the Harry James session with before any echo was added, because they added reverb to some of these tracks before they went and got pressed on 78 and 45s and so forth. But this really was a nice surprise that we found these tapes. And by the way, what we did on this is included some of the bonus tracks, the orchestra only track, some of the outtakes where you hear them rewinding the tape so Frank can sing the song again, and then he stops and starts, and then there's an instrumental only of another song, American Beauty Rose, which is pretty cool. So you can compare what Frank was hearing when he sang it and then the final product.
So you can experience not just listening to the original 10-inch, but you can experience what Frank was thinking, how he was producing, and not just having the access to the original analog tapes. We also have incredible, so Chuck, the historian he is, wrote the liner notes, so the story is incredible, but look at all the photos that we were able to obtain. I created this album with my art director, Robert Slager, with the vision that I wanted to look like a coffee book table. We meaning Impex Record, when we put out a one step, we are not just providing you with great music, a flat album, low noise for, quiet pressing, but we want to provide you something that's a little more of a bonus. And bonus to me isn't just the music, but it's an experience from the moment you open the album, what you're reading, what you're seeing, the art, the photos. There's the Western Union tab.
Yeah, we have telegrams that I found in the Columbia Records archive that show Frank kind of arguing with the executives at Columbia Records that they weren't sending him his records fast enough, or he was getting none of them and other guys were getting there. It's kind of like fun inside stuff.
Yeah, so there's a lot of just history about the making of this album, the time what Frank was doing, and we curate it like a coffee book table. I mean, yeah.
A coffee table book.
Coffee table. I was like, wait. And I haven't even started drinking yet. Not yet.
No, this really came together beautifully, and I'm really honored and privileged to be working with Abey and Jim Bance and the team at Elusive Disc and Impex. It's really amazing. We were very lucky. When I first listened to one of Abey's classical albums, that my engineer who did this album, Andreas Meyer, had done for Abey, I said, wow, this would be great for a Sinatra record. And then I think I called you that afternoon.
He called me that afternoon. We started the
conversation,
but it took over a year of conversation to really bring this project just on paper. And then we proposed it to Sony. And then from there, we started curating the tracks, the bonus, the story behind it. Because with every release, I said, okay, great, we have a great album, but what else do I get, especially for this price point? Speaking of price point, this album is going to be out June 14th. The product is already on Elusive Disc website, but if you are inclined or you are interested in placing a pre-order, if you order it this weekend and there's a code, when you check out, if you use the code AXPONA24, Elusive is offering a 10% discount on all pre-orders. The code is good, I think, for the weekend or for the next few days. Do you want to play this?
Yeah, so I was talking about how Frank directed his sessions, and I thought because we had the room on a full side of the 45 edition that we would put almost the complete session for a song called It All Depends on You from 1949. So I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm going to play the area where Frank has listened and done a run through, and now he's trying to direct the musicians and the technicians.
Okay. Where's the cut, Hugo? I want to make a cut. Bar 32. Bar 32. Play 3 beats. I think that brass that was on third beat, was swinging 8 notes.
Yeah. This one. Hugo, excuse me. Would you do when you as soon as you get a chance, you do the whole introduction with a muted brass?
Okay, Frank. I just want to make this cut to bar 48.
Now Frank is in the control room listening to how the recording is sounding from the perspective of the producer and the engineer.
Ready? What do you want to hear, Frank?
The introduction with the muted brass, huh? I like to get that as tight as we can. You may have trombones, you may have to turn around and face the microphone or something.
Well, they're cracking this for us, Frank.
Yeah. Yes, I'd like to hear the 6 of you as a unit.
Once again.
1 second, we get one of the 2 sides here.
He's talking about a microphone with 2 sides.
How is it?
I wasn't listening. Just once more, Hugo, and would you use less volume in the reeds, but with the clarinet lead, and play it lightly, trumpets and trombones, if you don't mind, old boy.
That's as long as we can play, Frank.
I mean, softly.
All right.
Here now, mind you, man, is here. Huh?
You can hear that Jersey.
All of you, all
yeah.
6 of you.
Definitely.
You got enough pad on the bass drum? It booms a little bit. Say, fellas, props, would you put a small piece of carpet enough to cover the entire bottom of the drum? Say, Johnny, Granata, would you play, play something, some kind of a figure, and have the rhythm fall in with you? We want to get a small balance on it. Hold it. Bass and guitar, so can you move it about a foot or so? Or you can pull the mic out if you wish, and the guitar also move in a little closer. Just a shade. Up, up, up.
Okay. So, most people don't think about how a record is made and how much time goes into the little details, but now you had a little glimpse of it in this little very rare and detailed session snippet. And trust me, you know, I've listened to hundreds of session tapes by all different artists. Nobody did this as an artist. This was really, really unusual. And I'm thankful that someone preserved, or it was Alec Wilder, the songwriter, that preserved those discs. And this album, by the way, is fully analog. We transferred everything from the original session tapes that we found, and we did all of our processing, which was very minimal. It was really a very slight amount of EQ and leveling that needed to be done through an analog board right to another analog tape, which became our master to cut from. The only situation where we had to use a slight amount of digital is for the 2 disc sessions that we didn't have tape for. They were recorded before tape, and we had to transfer them from a turntable, special turntable, onto digital. We cleaned them up and took the crackle out, and then we brought it right back to an analog tape and mastered it with all the analog tools that we used for everything else. So we think we really preserved the warmth, but we had to kind of use the digital technology just to remove the surface noise, which was really distracting. But they really came out very well, I think.
They did, and for the one-step process, we went from master, lacquer, stamper, album. So with the one-step process, it's not as forgiving as a traditional three-step. We bypass the father, the mother, and also the one-step process does not allow us the opportunity to repair a stamper, to buff a stamper, to clean a stamper. So for us to get a really quiet pressing, we could go through multiple lacquers to find one good in the batch. So we, the one with the horn, the section with the little horn, we were trying to fix that one section, so every time it was fixed, we would cut not a whole lacquer, but a sample test ref just for that one track. We would listen to it. We, make a test pressing, listen to it, because sometimes what you hear on the test pressing is not what you hear on the test ref. So there was so much work and care that went into releasing this album.
Yeah.
Yes?
I think.
Question on that topic real quick.
Sure.
So if you're doing these test pressings, does it matter where on the vinyl, inner versus outer rim, that would, where your bass, because I know that older orchestral records, they would,
Correct.
The bass and the treble had to be in a certain
Yeah,
spot of the record.
that's a great question,
And I was wondering if that had any influence on the track order.
It does. It does. As a matter of fact, when we did the 33 of this album, my original incarnation had that song, Farewell, Farewell to Love, at the end of side A. And I got to the studio in LA, to Grunman, and I started to think about it, and I said, why did I even think that was going to work? Because I'm so used to working with CDs.
Right.
I said, it's so high energy, there's so much sonic information, it's better to bump that to the beginning of side B, so that's what we did. And to do that, Chris Bellman had to literally cut the tape, it's all spliced anyway, and reverse the two songs on the tape, because when you cut the lacquer, you go in the order, you play it right from the tape, and that's what goes to the lacquer. So we did that, and that was obviously a good idea.
Very good.
So you do have to look at where you're cutting on the disc. I mean, I think if you're just doing a quick test, I think they probably just do it right in the middle or in the beginning. You just want to see if what you're hearing is translating, what you're doing in terms of EQ or lowering the level is translating, but you don't really know till you actually take that lacquer and make a test pressing on vinyl. So it's very tedious, but with the one-step process, it's just it's not forgiving. You really have to have everything in order and perfect to make it. So.
And when we approved the quality, our quality control director, Bob Donnelly, he listens to every test pressing, not just the first one. We listen to every copy that's sent to us, because maybe one place has a tick, 4 copies later it doesn't. So we're checking for consistency. And
Bob also listens to the lacquers. That's unusual. Most reissue producers will cut it in the studio, send it to be pressed as a test pressing. They'll listen to the test pressing, and then they decide we have to change A, B, or C, or there's noise in it. Bob takes the lacquer home and plays it on 3 different systems, and each one is kind of geared to give him an approximation of what it'll sound like when the consumer gets it. So a lower quality system, a mid-quality, and then a super audiophile system. So he's really getting a sense of how it's going to sound on all different things. And then he can go back and say, I think we need to tweak this EQ here. And that's unusual. Most people don't do that, but he's really meticulous, which
But
is
even
great.
those little tiny EQs make a big difference. Like our Getz Gilberto, these little tiny EQ changes really just...
They do.
Yeah, they make a big difference. So do you have any questions for Chuck?
Any other questions
Any
I can
other
answer?
questions?
No questions.
It's 130. All Impex one-steps are 130, and then 10% off if you pre-order today at Lucid Disc.
The piece we heard of him instructing is one of the...
Yes.
Yes.
It's all of side 4 is that session for that song.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think side A and B is the original 10-inch.
Yeah, side A, Side B, side C has the bonus tracks.
Some of the bonus track.
And then
D is
the session.
Yeah.
And then was that original 10-inch 33 1/3 or was
Yes.
Okay.
So it's funny because,
Because some 10 inches were 78s.
well, what they would do is, the 78 popular in jazz stuff were 10-inch 78s. What Columbia did when they did these albums in the very early days of the vinyl LP, the 10-inch LP, is they would do the 10-inch LP at 33. They would still do a 78 RPM album set with 4 78s, 2 songs on each one, and then they started doing the 7-inch EP box set. And then they did an EP fold open. So they had like 4 different formats. But the real, you know, the high fidelity one was the 10-inch LP.
And then I had a question. You had to do with the mixing of this, mixing it, right?
There's really no mixing. I mean, the mixing for a mono record happens at the session.
Right. No,
Would-
I was gonna ask if there was ever a discussion where you guys thought we could put it out in the original mono format, but we possibly could do something that's stereo with something like this.
Well, you know, it's interesting. When we first worked on this tape in 2019, or 2019 is when the original 33 came out, they didn't have AI to separate instruments. So in that short time, they have now developed algorithms in a computer program where you can play a recording that's mono, and you can just extract the oboe or the frequency for the vocal. And they have made some very convincing stereo remixes. I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like this was the record that the artist and the technicians made. They approved it, they wanted it. It's not I don't have that right to tamper with it. I don't. And I don't think it's fair because to me, I respect the technology of that moment. Everything about Impex's packages and everything I've ever done at any of the labels I've worked at, I've always had tremendous respect and retained the integrity of what the artist and the technicians did at the moment it was released, recorded and released. And I think that's the philosophy. You know, I don't want to be re-channeling it for stereo. I don't want to even be using AI because to me, I don't know if the producer and the artist would have liked that or wanted it. So to me, this is the way it sounds, and it sounds great. I love mono. I think there's a lot of really great mono that sounds better than stereo from the early stereo era. So, yeah, you could have done that, though. I've heard some pretty convincing things.
But part of listening to this is also experiencing what it was at that time.
Yeah.
We're not trying to modernize it in our version.
You know, when we say mixing, but really the art in what we do for an album like this is in the tape transfer and the mastering, you know, which is EQ and level and just making sure that everything sounds as true to the tape as it can. You know, and sometimes you have to use little tricks. We did all that in the analog domain, though.
Well, you drop the needle and close your eyes, and it takes you back to that place in time.
It really does.
And is this
Yeah.
a limited number pressing?
Yes, 5,000 is the limited. Our first pressing is 2,500. And we wanted to keep the authenticity of not just the music, but the look. So when you, here, can you hold this for me?
Yeah.
So when you open this and when you're seeing the jackets and when you see these little white spots, I don't know if I can show you. This is not bad pressing or ink coming off or cheap ink. This is intentionally making it look like it was from that time period. So we even want our packaging to feel like it was 1950.
Go ahead.
Did you gain anything by using a mono cartridge?
Well, that's a great question. I always use a mono cartridge for playing mono records. This is a mono recording, obviously, and I know what you're saying because you can still hear separation sometimes. Not separation, but there's a wider sound stage. We mastered this so that the sound stage is pretty much narrow and down the middle. But you know, I like using a mono cartridge. I think a mono cartridge just cancels out any extraneous little ticks that you get from pressing. Not that we're using VR 900 vinyl, which is the super vinyl. It's known for being very quiet and we have meticulous quality control, so hopefully, but you know, it's a physical process. You know, inevitably you're going to get a stray tick or pop. I like that the mono cartridge just cancels that out most of the time.
We're trying to perfect an imperfect format.
Yes. Well, you know, people became so accustomed to CD and SACD, you know, and if you remember the vinyl from 40 years ago, the record labels, especially the majors, they were just putting out the cheapest stuff they could. It was very frustrating. You know, now today there's so much better vinyl. There's so much better technology in terms of controlling the cut when you make your lacquer disc, the pressing, just the QC is so much better, hence the increased price. But you know, you really are getting the finest analog sound you can, which is nice. You know, I never would have been able to afford this kind of product when I was first listening to records, so, you know, but.
So,
Well,
anyways.
they do a great job. I have Famous Blue Raincoat.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
And I have 3 copies of that. I have the original
Wow.
album. I have the 25th anniversary, which was 45 speed, and I
Right.
thought that was it.
Right.
And then I got yours, and I don't listen to the other 2 anymore.
Wow.
Well, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Impressive job.
Thanks.
The 45 was my
Yeah.
benchmark. The Cisco 45 was my benchmark. So
Yeah.
I went from there.
I have to say, you know, I worked at Sony, or I still work at Sony, but I have been there 32 years. And I think I said this before, you know, I walked into my engineer's studio to work on another project, and he said, oh, I said, what is this album? It was Leonard Bernstein. I picked it up. I love classical music. I love the Columbia classics and the RCA Living Stereo. He said, take it home. I have an extra. So I took it home. I put it on my turntable. A minute and a half in, I said, oh my gosh, this sounds amazing. It's so clear, and the tonality is all there, and it was really a brilliant sound. And I called Andreas and said, I want to work with this girl. We have to do something. So, you know, to hear you say that is great, because it's really an amazing company, you know.
Well, we're short on time, so,
Yes, so we're good.
Thank you very much
Thanks.
for attending, and I hope you enjoyed
you.
it.
Great.